William the Lion is a Scottish king who's remembered for lacking the subtlety, the intelligence, the statesmanship of his predecessors. His reign is marked by the fact that he didn't really achieve all that much. And this, coupled with the fact that he had 6 illegitimate children, would suggest that William the Lion and Boris the Liar have quite a lot in common in that respect. But it's a very unfair comparison, because it doesn't matter how many children William produced, at least he acknowledged their existence. Do you know what I mean? That is what separates the William the Lions and the Rod Stewarts from the Boris Johnsons of this world. And William, he was completely and utterly obsessed with the north of England and on getting back the land that his grandfather David had acquired for Scotland and which his brother Malcolm had then handed back to England. William would berate Henry II about having these lands returned to Scotland. Apparently, the mere mention of William's name was enough to send Henry into a furious rage. It is a very similar reaction that I have to Susan Calman on the Great British Menu. Do you mean get a move bushing, get a move bushing? Shut up, Susan. Every single week, the same pudding chance. Oh God. Now, in 1174, Henry, he faces a Great Revolt. It's a rebellion that's started by his own children, young Henry, Geoffrey, Richard, and their mother Eleanor. It really is the epitome of she's turned the wains against us. It's like the Jackson 5 turning on the dad, And the reason why they're rebelling is they're not very happy with the amount of land that their dad is giving them. Yeah, Henry has to go and invade Ireland just to keep his kids happy. Being a Norman king was basically like being a Saudi prince. Do you know what I mean? Having to go around and buy Premiership football clubs just to keep your wains happy. They were so obsessed with land, right, that their younger brother John, they took the piss out of him by naming him John Lackland because he had fuck all land. Do you know what I mean? Which is how I imagine private school kids bully each other. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, here comes Tarquin, no inheritance. Like when I was at school, I had a pair of high-tech trainers, right? And when I walked the corridors, as I walked past, people go, put your high-techs in the air, put your high-techs in the air, put your high-techs in the air, holding their shoes above their head. That's how you bully folk, Tarquin, On a side note, by the way, if anyone from high-tech, Gola, or Pony would like to get in touch, if you're interested in sponsoring Mountebank, nobody rocks a pair of catalogue football boots like this guy here, I can tell you. Now, William, he thinks he can take advantage of the Great Revolt by helping himself to Northumberland and Cumbria. He has a disastrous attempt at taking Newcastle. He then falls back to Alnwick. He's besieging Alnwick Castle. And he's caught by Henry's men. Henry has him locked in a dungeon in Normandy. And the conditions of William's release is that he has to pay homage to Henry. Henry installs garrisons, English garrisons, at Roxburgh, Berwick, Edinburgh and Stirling. In Scotland, it becomes a vassal state of England. Henry declares himself the Overlord of Scotland, which is a title that the Tories are trying to bring back in the 21st century. Now, a couple of years after his release, William, he founded Arbroath Abbey. And Arbroath Abbey is dedicated to God and to Sir Thomas Becket, Archbishop and martyr. Now, Thomas Becket, at one point, was the most glittering figure in Henry II's court. Henry had him promoted to Chancellor, and then he made him Archbishop of Canterbury. But the relationship broke down when Thomas Becket started pushing for separate rights for church from state. This really pissed Henry off. And 5 of his knights murdered Thomas Becket in Canterbury Cathedral. Now, the murder sent shockwaves across Europe, and public opinion quickly turned on Henry II. And things got worse for him when people started saying, they were telling stories of all these miracles that were occurring at the tomb of Thomas Becket. And just a few years after Becket's death, he was made a saint. So now, Henry II was a king that killed a saint. So Henry, he had to give public penance for the death of Thomas Becket. And William, and if I can love him for this, William dedicated Arbroath Abbey to Thomas Becket purely because he knew that Henry II absolutely hated the guy. But Henry could hardly get upset about William dedicating Arbroath Abbey to Thomas Becket when he had just paid public penance for his death. It is the most delicious, beautiful, subtle fuck you imaginable. Probably the only subtle thing that William actually managed to achieve in his reign. Do you know what I mean? Like naming an important public building in Scotland after someone who was murdered by the royal family and whom the royal family then had to pretend that they were upset about. It would be like dedicating the Scottish Parliament to Princess Diana, you know? Amazing. Now, when Henry dies, his brother Richard became king. He's most commonly known as Richard Lionheart. And Richard was obsessed with going on crusade and constantly needed money for going on crusades. Richard apparently only spent 6 months in England. He spent most of his time in the southwest of France and his lands there. And he only really used England when he needed money to go on crusade. He used the country to bail him out when he needed money. He was very much the 12th century version of Richard Branson in that respect. He's the sort of prick that would have you out clapping for crusaders, you know. But William, he sees an opportunity and he offers to buy back the castles that Henry had taken from him. So Richard agrees, needing the money, and William then offers to buy the land in the north of England, but Richard doesn't agree to that. And when Richard dies, his brother John becomes King John the First, or as I prefer to call him, King John Un. Thank you very much. And the same thing continues. William offers to buy the land in the north of England, and John refuses. And John, he starts to build a castle at Tweedmouth, which William levels twice. And John gets significantly pissed off that he marches a huge army up to Tweedmouth. And William, he takes an army down to Roxburgh, but he steps back from the brink of war. And in the Treaty of Norham, he agrees that Scotland has no claim to the lands in the north of England. And basically, it marks the end of his life's work. And William the Lion, he's known as William the Lion because he was the first to put the lion rampant on his royal insignia. And the lion rampant remains a symbol of Scottish defiance, which I think William would love. And I love the fact that it's attributed to William the Lion as well, because I feel like William could be the most Scottish of all of us. Here's this guy, this fierce Scottish nationalist who essentially achieved fuck all in his 49-year reign. If ever there was a more appropriate flag to take into Hampden Park with you than the Lion Rampant, there is nothing more Scottish than that, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, thanks very much for listening, folks. See you next week.